Welcome to Extraordinary Vets. I'm your host, Donna Harris, a veterinarian at Michigan State University's College of Veterinary Medicine and a futurist. On this show, we explore the future of veterinary medicine by talking with the people who are building it now. Our guest today is Dr. Joe Gaydos. He is currently a marine mammal veterinarian with the SeaDoc Society and serves as the senior wildlife veterinarian and the science director. But he's had a squiggly career to his current position, and we can't wait to hear about that. So welcome to the show, Dr. Gaydos.
Thank you so much for having me, Donna.
We're so glad you're here. And I got to start with the thing that sometimes we start at the beginning, but not with you, because I want to know what you're doing at CDOC. I guess you probably should tell us what is CDOC, because we have veterinarians and non-veterinarian listeners. So tell us about your day-to-day. Tell us about CDOC. We'll just start there.
Yeah, so SeaDoc, think of it as Sea Doctors. So we're interested in ocean health. We are a program out of the vet school at UC Davis,
Okay.
which is a little bit strange when you realize that for the last 25 years, I've been working on Orcas Island in Washington State. And so we're really focused on place-based conservation. We're focused on this 17,000 square kilometer inland sea that's shared by Washington and British Columbia. And so people think like, what is UC Davis doing up here? But we have programs, we have gorilla doctors in Central Africa and Uganda and Rwanda. We have a South American ecosystem health program in Argentina and Chile and places like that. And so it's not that unusual. And it's been great for me to live up here and have my career up here. So we're a program out of the vet school. We fund and conduct science. We're interested in ocean health. We realize sometimes that means taking care of individual animals, and sometimes that means testifying on policy that may help tons of animals. So we're an information or science-based program that's interested in wildlife health and ocean health.
That's really interesting. Since you're up there, you said up in Washington State, between Washington and British Columbia, do you work with the veterinary school up there as well? Or is it purely just UC Davis?
Yeah, we know the veterinary school. We see students and talk to students from the veterinary school sometimes, but we really work less with veterinarians and more with people that are doing conservation, people that are doing
Ah,
policy, state and provincial agencies, federal agencies in the US and Canada and things like that. So we're really working with people that are on the ground more than we are kind of teaching students and doing the traditional veterinary school sort of a thing.
okay. So for our veterinarians and our pre-veterinarian, all of our listeners that are listening to this thinking, well, that's an interesting career. Let's rewind a bit and go back to where'd you go to veterinary school? Tell us how you got
Yeah,
at least to veterinary school.
right. I think I was like probably most veterinarians. I was that kid that always had a frog in his pocket or was out fishing or, was catching turtles and things like that. So I was out. My parents worked a lot when I was a kid. I was outside all the time and it was great. And so I was lucky enough, not everybody has that luck in their life that I was able to say I would love to work with animals when I, have a job. And my dad was a physician and kind of worked in public health, and my mom was a researcher, and so they always questioned me, what do you know about this, and helped me buy books
Mm.
and things like that. And so I think I was interested in animals, but I was always interested in diseases and surgery and how does one get their hands on a big bear without it hurting you and things like that. And so it was really a natural fit for me to be able to go to vet school. At one point, I thought about going to medical school, and I thought, I'm going to sit in class and go like, how does that work in a giraffe? Like, I'm just going to have so many questions they're not going to be able to answer. And so it's just a real natural fit for me to go to vet school. And I moved around a lot as a kid. And so vet school sometimes is tied to where you live. I went to high school in Maryland, and so Pennsylvania still had a slot for some Maryland residents, even though the vet school had just opened up at Virginia Tech. And so I was able to get one of those in-state slots at University of Pennsylvania, and I went to vet school at University of Pennsylvania.
Because back when you and I were applying to veterinary school, they called that Virginia, Maryland, didn't they?
Virginia, Maryland, yeah, and I think they still do,
Oh,
and
they
I
do,
went to I
okay.
went to undergraduate down there,
Oh.
um, and then I just was like, "Wow, if I go to vet school here, am I gonna just be out fishing and backpacking, or am I actually if I go to school in the city, I'll probably study a lot more." That would be better for me to do that.
So you ended up at UPenn, well, good for you. And
Yeah.
when you went into veterinary school, were you thinking about zoo or marine, or were you heading in a different direction?
No, I was always thinking about wildlife, and I didn't really grow up, wanting to be a marine biologist or anything like that. I just grew up loving wild animals, and I really didn't, there weren't a lot of jobs when I was in vet school, so I didn't know what would pan out. I mean, I knew I had loans to pay off, things like that, and I kind of lucked out when I was in vet school. I'd got a scholarship to do a year of public service, and I was doing an externship at the Philadelphia Zoo, and they had a program going in Zimbabwe. And I said, well, if they need a vet, I'll go. I got a scholarship to do a year of public service. And this guy, Bill Constance, came back to me. It was like a brown bag lunch thing. We were just sitting and chatting. And he came back to the vet hospital. He goes, are you serious about that? I said, oh yeah, I lived in Kenya when I was an undergrad for a year. I said, I'm not going to go over there and come back because there's not hot showers. And so he said, okay, let's talk. And so I did a year over in Zimbabwe right out of school.
Right out of
And
vet school.
yeah, I probably spent 3 months trying to make some money, working in emergency clinics and things like that, relief work, that sort of thing, and then went over there.
And what'd
Um,
you do over there?
oh, it was great, Donna. It was crazy. There was a captive facility, so they did some research and some breeding. They had a cheetah breeding, rhino breeding, diker breeding facility, and they also had some rehab. And then there was a wildlife park, and so I got to do everything from, making vaccine programs to doing surgery on animals to chemical capture of animals to, helping out with some studies looking at long acting tranquilizers and things like it was like a dream come true for me. It was great.
That I can't even imagine right out of school. Well, you said you went a couple months, but still, that's pretty green.
Oh, I know, it's super green. I was just leaning on all. I mean, there were vets that were in town, and I like half of my luggage were books. And so it's, because there was no internet in those days.
No.
This is 94 when I got out of school. And so I couldn't even, email or internet or that sort of a thing. Um, so yeah, it was just one of those trial by fire things, and it was amazing.
So you get out of veterinary school, you cram a couple months in, you go ship yourself off to Zimbabwe where you're just intellectually and experientially, you're just stimulated all the time. Then you come back to the US, everything had to be boring.
Yeah, well, I went into mixed practice in a rural area, and I thought that was where we're going to raise some kids there, in rural West Virginia, and never have to buy them shoes or whatever. And I did about 3 years of that, but I just kept missing the wildlife. I really liked the people. I liked the diversity of what we were doing. But I'd have somebody come in with a dog with parvovirus, and once you see a lot of parvovirus, you feel pretty comfortable. And I'd say, raccoons get parvovirus, but I don't think we know the genetics. Is it the same virus? And people would look at me like, "What? Why are you even telling me this?" And I was like, you
Y-
know what?
But you're questioning everything, huh?
I love wildlife. Like I just think about it all day long.
Yeah.
And so that's when I went back to grad school. I was really lucky and got a position down in University of Georgia. I went back to grad school.
Yeah, but you didn't go to just grad school. From what I was reading, you also were running a house call practice, trying to
Yeah,
make
because I
some
didn't
money
know.
while you're working
I
on your
didn't know,
PhD.
Donna. Like, my wife
How's
was
that
like,
possible?
my wife was like, you know what? You're going to do this grad school, and you still have a lot of debt to pay, and there might not be a job. And I said, I know. I got to keep up with, this. So I was doing a house call business at night, and I would take. I had one daughter when I started, and I would sometimes pick her up, and I'd take her with me, and I'd give her a lollipop. And then she'd be like, we'd get in the car and she'd say, Daddy, why that dog bite that other dog's tail off? And I'm
Oh,
like, I don't know, honey, but at least we got it fixed up, right? It's just it was a busy time. I was glad to put that behind me.
yeah, I bet. But it's good to have some income if you've got little kids and, like you said, student debt. I got to ask you, maybe this is my ignorance, but I don't think of Georgia
Mhm.
as a school or a state that would have a wildlife program, but they did.
Yeah, it's super cool. There's a place there at the vet school called this, it's a bad name, called the Southeastern Wildlife Disease Cooperative, SCWDS. And they provide veterinary and disease support. When I was there for about 14 different state agencies, and then including Puerto Rico. And so we would go around and give classes on chemical capture and immobilization, or people would send in carcasses if they had a disease outbreak in eagles or things like that. Or we would go and do herd health checks in different areas. And so it was a very wildlife management focused disease program. And the reason I feel really lucky that I went there is that, in vet school you learn how to maybe immobilize a deer and do surgery, but you don't learn how to evaluate the health of an entire population.
Right.
And this was really a population health focused program. I mean, we did the individual animal stuff as well, but it was really a lot more epidemiology, big picture. What does the state agency need to know and do if they have an outbreak of chronic wasting disease, or if they have, something else going on? So there was a lot of learning through grad school, but a lot of learning from working there as well.
What I love about that, there's a number of veterinary students and young veterinarians like you that are finding themselves in practice and not scratching the itch they want to scratch.
Mhm, mhm.
So they shouldn't cross some of these programs off. Like I didn't know that Georgia would have a wildlife program that
Right.
was that valuable, and they shouldn't cross those off their list if they want to move in a different direction.
100%, and that's the thing, and that's the beauty of veterinary medicine, is that you take all those skills that you have and you can pivot into something else. And I had client, communication skills and surgery skills, and I've been working for what, 4 or 5 years or something like that. And then I got there on day one and I was like a greenhorn. I didn't know anything. I mean, I had some things to contribute, but mostly I was just like a sponge. And then my next job, I was able to bring all of those things together, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I can imagine your year in Zimbabwe though was a couple years of experience kind of crammed into one.
Yeah, a lot of nail biting too. I mean, it was like, I was really fortunate that there were some great vets over there that I could lean on. And I took a chemical capture course when I first got there so I could get my pharmacy license and get atorphine and drugs like that. So I had those people to reflect back on too. I just, when you look back over your career, I'm so grateful to all the mentors that I had.
Mhm.
Um, and that's why I'm always love when anybody calls, I'm happy to talk to somebody because I just feel like I could never pay that back in a lifetime.
Oh, that's amazing and great to hear. All right, so you squiggled from UPenn
Mhm.
to Zimbabwe to
Yeah.
mixed animal to a PhD in wildlife, but then you squiggled again and you shifted to marine mammals, but it sounds like your PhD work was your calling. So
Yeah.
what's why the shift to California?
Yeah, so I did, my PhD was in virology, working on deer, with an orbivirus. The nice thing in wildlife medicine, there's not a lot of people doing it. So you meet people at conferences and stuff like that. And I'd met all these really amazing people at Davis. Kirsten Gilardi, John Amazette, Walter Boyce, Mike Zaccardi, all of these people who were doing really neat stuff. And I saw this a job advertisement, and I thought, ooh, it'd be fun to work with all of those people that are kind of cutting edge and doing some neat stuff in the wildlife world. The job was in Washington. And so I thought, okay, that's a little interesting. And it was working on ocean stuff. And I thought, wow, geez, I really don't know very much about the ocean at all, but sounds like it's a beautiful place. And my wife had family out here in Washington State. So she had family on Whidbey Island. So I thought, I'm just going to apply. And somehow I got an interview. So I remember, like, I read a coffee table book on the ocean. I read like a marine biology textbook before the interview. And I thought, this is amazing. Look at all this stuff. And like, look at how little we know about wildlife diseases in the marine world. This is just fascinating. And so I still don't know why they hired me, Donna, but they, I think I had a little bit of biopolitics. I'd worked with state agencies and different groups like that, and I think that was probably good. And then, it was like being a fifth grader all over again. I learned how to scuba dive. I could drive a boat, but I really learned how to drive a boat well, and I really learned about, you know, I work on marine mammals, but also work on birds. I work on fish. We have projects working looking at abalone recovery. And so it was like a whole new world opened up, and it was just like a kid in a candy shop all over again. It was really, really fun.
That sounds amazing. And you've gotten to do some really interesting things. I would think, how long have you been at the Orca Island job?
Yes, I've been here for 25 years now.
25 years, and certainly the awareness of of climate change and the importance of the ocean, at least that seems like the public is paying more attention to that. Is that good for you or is that challenging for you?
I think it's great. I mean, I think awareness is a really important thing. When people have awareness about animal welfare, we all try and do better. When people have an
Mm,
awareness about the dire situation in the oceans right now, we start to do better. So we have a UN decade of the oceans where people are thinking about this, and ocean wildlife is amazing. Not everybody gets to see it because a lot of it's underwater. Or if we look at a marine mammal, they're at the surface a very small portion of their life. And then the marine birds, they come and they go seasonally, so they're also hard to get to know. But when you start to see how complex and amazing that ecosystem is, I mean, we have places where herring spawn, and I liken it to the wildebeest migration in the Serengeti, because there's just all of these fish coming in and spawning, and predators are coming in, and other predators are coming in eating those predators, and it's just like all these layovers of trophic levels happening, and it's incredible to watch that. But we
wow.
definitely can do a better job of taking care of this place.
And so, do you host veterinary students from UC Davis or from around the country to help them understand what you're doing out at CDOC?
Yeah, we did that for a while, but I would say not since COVID. And two things happened. I think one of them, it's a weird place to live. In the Salmon Islands are expensive, and in the summertime, there's not a lot of housing. And so we had a donor that provided free housing, and then we could provide a stipend so they didn't have to depend on, they could still be earning money and have a free place to live. And so we lost the donor housing, and then COVID hit, and then we just never reinvigorated that program. We still work with a lot of students, and even veterinarians who are interested in getting some experience, but we don't have an actual program right now for that.
Okay. All right, well, that's good to know because some students are gonna hear this program and be reaching out, I'm sure. And so I gotta pick a little bit at some of the things I've learned about you.
Yeah.
So, you wrote a children's book. You wrote a children's book about nature, um, and I've never heard this term before, so educate me. You wrote this nature book about the Salish Sea.
Yeah.
Is that what you call around those San Juan
Right.
Islands?
So if you look at a map, there's this inland sea that stretches from Washington State around Seattle and Olympia all the way up past the city of Vancouver and inside of Vancouver Island. And it's
Okay.
pretty big. It's 17,000 square kilometers. And it didn't have a name when I got here. It was called Puget Sound in Washington and the Georgia Basin in
Yeah.
Canada. But ecologically, the whole thing is one place. And
Okay.
so we're thinking about conservation of wildlife and place-based conservation. How do you save a place that doesn't have a name? And
Mm.
so in about 2009, there had been this guy, Bert Weber, who was working on the name for a while, and people started adapting it. And the term Salish is to honor the Coast Salish people who have lived here since time immemorial and still live here, and they're still an integral part of this place, still have traditional tribal fishing and hunting and gathering rights and things like that. So the name was put together in their honor, and then Washington and British Columbia and then the US federal government and the Canadian federal government adopted it. It didn't take away any names, but it just gave a name to the whole place as a whole. And then what we did when that happened, about 2010, I think is when everything kind of came through. We're like, wow, we have a big job in getting people to know this place as an ecosystem. So Audrey Benedict, a friend of mine, and I wrote this book, and we got beautiful. We kind of made it a National Geographic sort of thing. So we had 255 photographers, and we wrote a book on the Salish Sea, and just trying to educate people. And people would send us pictures of their kids reading it,
Oh, nice.
and then we thought we should do a kids book, because fifth grade is when kids learn about ecosystems and trophic levels and all of that. And we have, in the US, these next generation science standards. Why not give them something they can learn about what's in their backyard? And so we did a kids book, and then we realized, wow, only kids whose parents have $20 extra can buy this book. And so we did a Kickstarter program. So now we I don't know how much we raised, but we keep raising. We raised $25,000. So we've been giving books away to Title I and Tribal Connect schools. And then a lot of the fifth grade teachers was like, this is good, but I don't know much about science. So we hired a woman named Mira Lutz, who did a beautiful next generation science standards on the curriculum for fifth grade teachers. So they can use the book, they can use the curriculum, teach all the stuff they need to know, because not a lot of fifth grade teachers go into that because they love science. They're like, okay, well, show me how to do the science. And so, yeah, so we did the kids book on that. And it was kind of fun because we got to talk about healthy animals and what vets do and healthy ecosystem. I think we had a picture in there about some veterinarians from the Marine Mammal Center taking a plastic packing strap off of a sea lion under anesthesia, so they could kind of see the hands-on of that. It was a really fun project.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and that all came out of the SeaDoc Society?
Yeah, and so, our program is really supported by private people in the area who are like, "Hey, I like this. I like what you're doing." So, we get some grants, but a lot of private donations. And people said, "Yeah, it's, great to do something that gets kids educated, because they're going to be voters soon. They're going to be driving cars and boats. They're going to be taking care of this place."
Yeah, that's right. And then so here you did this children's book, it sounds like is that still being used and
Yeah,
still
it's
out
still out
there?
there. It's still, you can find it at your local independent bookstore or Amazon or whatever. Still published, still out there.
Great, and then I learned that I'm actually talking to a movie star.
That would be a
Oh,
stretch, Donna.
no, no. Now when you're nominated for a couple Emmy Awards, that is I should get
Yeah.
your autograph as part of this
Yeah.
podcast. So,
Yeah,
I mean,
that was,
that's super fun, but
yeah.
talk to me about that. So
Well,
was it an actual movie, a show? It was YouTube
yeah, it's a
content.
YouTube series called Salish Sea Wild.
Okay.
And part of that, when people like to read books, but not a lot of people read books. Like, we read books, but a lot of
Mhm.
people never read books after they leave high school. And so, in thinking about how do you reach more people or how do you reach more kids, having something visual that's entertaining and easy to consume is good for the teachers, it's good for the kids, good for their parents. And so my friend Bob Friel, who has produced a lot of stuff, he'd been bugging me for years, like, let's do it, let's do a show. I think, I'm a veterinarian, I'm a scientist.
Right.
I'm not going to do it. He said, no, I'll make it easy for you. And he really is the genius behind the whole thing. And so I said, okay, I agree. We got to reach more people. Let's do this. And so it's all kind of band-aided and shoestring together. But because Bob is a talented writer, he's a talented videographer, um, we just started putting together a spreadsheet. Okay, we could do something on this. We could do, in one episode, we're diving with sea lions. Another episode, we're taking packing straps. Another episode, we're surgically implanting transmitters in sea ducks so we can learn where they go to. And another one, we just did one on grizzly bears that was really fun because not a lot of people know the connection between bears and salmon is so similar to the connection between bears and these resident killer whales that we have.
Mm.
So it just gets us a chance to tell the story, and then gives Bob and I a chance to go to really wild places.
So you're still producing those?
Yeah, we are. We probably make anywhere from, 4 to 6 a year. And we send them out to the teachers that use the curriculum, and
Mhm.
then we send them out to, to the general public. And I think the bear one, some of them get really big uptake, like the bear. There's been 25,000 views in a couple of weeks. People are really loving it. We did one on abalone recovery, and I don't think it's as actually that was one that was nominated for an Emmy, but we did that one specifically because we had been working on abalone recovery for 15, 20 years, and Washington State just put some money into it. So, they put a recovery plan out. We said, what are you going to have, like a bake sale to fund this thing? Like, you need to
Yeah.
have a budget. And so we were able to go to the legislature and say, you should really fund this thing. And and then we sent them the video. We sent them the YouTube link and said, hey, this is what you funded. Thank you for making that happen. And we had senators and representatives calling or emailing saying, this is great. We never get to see the benefit of what we fund when we get this stuff done. And so thank you for sharing that. And then it'll come up for refinancing sometime in the next couple of years. And we want them to remember, why it was important and what they made happen.
So these projects are great and they're obviously important for advancing your cause. How much of your day, when you think about your day to day, how much is working on these projects? Do you get to do much clinical medicine anymore?
Mm. The clinical medicine is really like for 20 the first 20 years in this job, I worked at the local animal shelter one night a week just so I could keep doing surgery.
Sure.
And so I'm spaying 2-pound kittens, and then doing anesthesia on puppies or whatever. And then when I have to go out and do implant transmitters on birds, well, I was doing surgery last week. So I really felt like I needed to have something to maintain that clinical skill,
Sure.
because it's very episodic now. We may have a project where I'm, handling birds and doing anesthesia and doing surgery, and that may not come across for another 2 years for something like that.
Mm.
So I really needed to maintain my clinical skills, and who doesn't love working on dogs and cats? And so that was a good way for me to kind of keep that stuff going.
Yeah, I love that. I noticed that you do some spays and neuters and just interacting and there's nothing like a puppy.
Yeah,
Nothing.
exactly. Exactly. And it was, my kids kind of were able to grow up and see that, and, they're doing their homework while I'm doing surgery and that sort of thing. And then they come in when they're done and get to watch. And so that was still fun. Took a while for them to realize, like, because they don't, you go out to work on a seal or a whale, they don't see anything. And they just thought it was
Right.
normal, whatever and then one of my daughters, she liked to ride horses, and she'd get so bent out of shape when my wife would put my name down for the 4-H as the veterinarian. And then finally one time her horse was pretty lame, and so I called up a friend. I said, look, I got a 3 out of 5 lameness left front. I think it's the carpus. Can you come shoot some pictures? And they came and they said, yeah, you got some arthritis in there, and they handed us the bill. And I love 4-H because I just handed it to my daughter, and she said, how much of this do I have to pay? And she's looking at the bill, and then she goes, wait a minute, what's this professional discount? I said, well,
Whoa.
that's because we're us vets, we have to take care of each other.
Yeah.
And I helped out a little bit. I kind of knew what was going on and saved them a bunch of time. She looked at me, she goes, so you are a professional veterinarian?
Oh, it's your heart right
I
there,
was
huh?
like, yeah, I guess I am. How about that?
Wow. And are any of those kids heading to the veterinary field?
That one is actually a nurse at Children's ER. So she likes the medicine for sure, but she
Okay.
working on kids.
Okay, great. I want to ask you a little bit because we're going to get some listeners here. A lot of students and early career veterinarians, they want to have their hands in wildlife. Maybe they have an opportunity like you've had. Maybe they don't. Maybe they just want to do something a little bit on the side. So what advice would you give them to scratch that itch like you talk about? How could they set themselves apart for
Mhm.
something like this?
Yeah, I think, one, having the interest is really the primary thing. To be interested in it, and vets are general are very good learners and listeners, and reach out to people that are doing things. Like we routinely will have veterinarians who are looking for a career change come and help us with necropsies or things like that.
Okay.
And I was asking for that, and so I'm always happy to try and make that happen when possible. So just look for, there's way more classes out there now than there used to be. um, there's opportunities to get involved with marine mammal stranding networks. There's opportunities to get involved with rehabilitation centers, and there's a lot less. I would say when I started, there was a big division between people working on free ranging wildlife and people doing rehabilitation. And now, and then even with zoos, and now we see that there's so much of a crossover and continuum, and we're
Mm,
all learning so much from each other, um, that I think it's the vibe out there is really much more kind and appreciative of all the skills that people bring. And so, somebody that's doing surgery in a rehabilitation center also can be doing surgery to help out a biologist if you're, implanting intracellular transmitters and SeaDocs or things like that. And so I think there's much more of a continuum now. And so I think it's good to just kind of, you know, get your foot in the door wherever you can find an opportunity to help people out like that.
yeah, when you mentioned necropsies, a lot of times I would think of practitioners, somebody calls and says, "Hey, I found this hawk, this
Hmm.
whatever." Um, we as veterinarians can legally do a necropsy, which for our non-veterinary listeners is like an autopsy, but auto means a person. So we use the term necropsy to open them up and see if we can see why they may have died or whatever. But we can legally do that on wildlife, can't we?
Yeah, and
Or
I think the thing that I would do is just contact your state agency. So each state has a natural resource agency, Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Natural Resources. They're called different things in different states. But say, hey, what, am I okay to do this? Because I would just check, it might be different by state. And who is the veterinarian for the state where I live? And sometimes veterinarians are say, yeah, we would love for you to do that. Um, use the appropriate PPE. And oh, by the way, I would love to, go ahead and get this, send it in for histology. Or you know what, we're having a big avian influenza outbreak right now. Rather than do a complete necropsy, we're just asking everybody to sample cloacal and a choanal swab and send that in for avian influenza testing. Um, and so I would just kind of work with your state agency and see what they have. And I think sometimes you get interest in stuff like that. It's good to know which vets you can say, hey, could you get out there, necropsy a deer? We might be having an adenovirus hemorrhagic disease outbreak. Can you get some samples for us? Because it's hard to be everywhere when you're a state wildlife veterinarian.
yeah, I think that's amazing. I think that you've done a great job in your career at transforming or establishing certain work habits and then being able to transfer them to a different career path. I think
Yeah.
that's amazing. Before we wrap up, I gotta, as a futurist, I gotta look to the future. And when you think of your world, the ocean, or maybe the veterinary profession in general, what do you think our biggest challenges are going to be in the next 10 and 20 years? Kind of look way out there. What do you think we
Yeah.
got going?
I think we're seeing some unprecedented changes. When you read about the loss of biodiversity and the loss of wildlife and changes we're seeing in the ocean and changes with even current patterns and weather systems and things like that, I think we're in 10 years from now, we're going to be like, wow, it was hard to envision this. And so I think trying to stay resilient, look for opportunities to make a difference, is really going to be important over the next 10 years. And I think veterinarians play an important role in that. They're system thinkers, they're natural communicators with the public and with people. They understand health, they understand the relationship between wildlife health and human health and environmental health. I think veterinarians have a really big role to play as the ecosystem changes, and remind people that it behooves us to take care of this place, not just because we love it, but we also need it.
Yeah, I'm going to really put you on the spot here because you're on the forefront of creating programs that make a difference and seeing the results. But we hear so much negative. Are you
Mhm.
feeling positive with the way things are going? Are you feeling discouraged?
Yeah, Donna, it depends on the day, right? And I think that some days, I can look and I can see things that a lot of the general public doesn't get to see. Um, when a dam comes down and salmon return to a river, like what's happening in the Klamath River right now, California and Oregon, what's happened with the Elwha here in Washington State, that is phenomenal. And you realize like we can make a difference. Or when you see a gray whale, when I moved here 25 years ago, we would not see humpback whales because they had
Mm,
all been hunted out and the population was still growing. Now we can see a humpback whale any month of the year. And so I
wow.
can see those successes and I can appreciate and I can enjoy those. We have so many bald eagles. People are like, yeah, it's bald eagle, but you realize when I was a kid, we were really struggling to recover bald eagles because of DDT and eggshell thinning and lack of big trees, people shooting them. So we have these successes, and we can solve some of these problems, and we can recover some of these wildlife species, and that can benefit us as society and as individuals. And so some days I have to remind myself of that, but most days I go to work feeling like, hey, I'm here to make a difference. Let's see what I can do.
Well, you are making a difference, and we really appreciate it. And what a great example you are for the veterinarians and the students that want to have some wildlife medicine in their life. It's possible. They have
Totally.
to be flexible and grab opportunities. You certainly have as you transition from herd health, wildlife into marine, and making a great difference there on Orca Island. Makes me want to come visit.
Yeah,
I've
I'd
been
love to
over
have you,
there.
Donna. Yeah, my life is a product of so many mentors, and there's a lot of that out there in the veterinary field, and that's why I just love being a veterinarian.
Yeah. So our guest this episode has been Joe Gaydos. He is the senior wildlife veterinarian and science director at the SeaDoc Society, which is affiliated, is that the right term, with
Yeah,
UC
program.
Davis Veterinary
Yeah,
School. So thank
yeah.
you so much for coming on and giving us some hope for the ocean and some hope for veterinary students that want to be wildlife veterinarians.
Thanks, Donna, and thanks for your program.
Thank you all for joining us for this episode of Extraordinary Vets, brought to you by Michigan State University's College of Veterinary Medicine. This is Extraordinary Vets, where every career tells a story. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.